panel and with my co-host, John Byrne from Poets and Quants, the two of us welcoming the world's top business schools from all over the world to gain perspectives on your personal development, where the MBA fits as you take those next steps in your career. And I suspect that if I asked graduates from the class of 2003 or the class of 2013, and certainly with the graduating class, that MBA of yours, would you do it all again? The overwhelming response would be yes. And not just for what immediately happens in terms of accelerating your career, making a successful transition, but the benefits of such a great education that will serve you at a personal and professional level for the rest of your career, for the rest of your life. So the theme of this panel, the enduring value of the MBA, and we really did want to emphasize this idea of how it continues to provide such a wonderful return on the investment that you've made. And where better to turn than three top international business schools. It's always a pleasure to welcome Brandon Kirby. Brandon is the Director of Marketing and Admissions at the Rotterdam School of Management. Joining him, Marcella Rispo. Marcella could probably do this panel in 5 or 6 languages. I think we'll stick with English for my benefits, but I suppose it typifies IMD in Lausanne, such an international school, and Marcella is responsible for recruitment and admissions for Western Europe. And then joining us from, well, I'll say Montreal, though we won't reveal the location, Jean-Paul Ferguson. Jean-Paul is both a professor and associate professor of organizational behavior. He was at Stanford GSB before joining Des Hotels and is now the academic director of the MBA program. Thank you, all three of you, for joining us at Center Court. And, you know, taking the long view, and perhaps Brandon, starting with you, not just those great career opportunities as you finish the RSM program, but what are some of those significant long-term impacts of the MBA in the 5, 10+ years that follow?
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's a great question. I think one of the first things when you're considering an MBA, and especially the lasting impact, is that it's like planting seeds. Some plants grow faster than others. So I always say the MBA has a very long tail. So there's some things that you will put in practice immediately. There are some things that will happen maybe a few years down the line, and there will be some that hopefully you never have to encounter, but if you do, you have the tools in order to be able to do that. So from that perspective, I think it's also about where you are in your journey, and that's going to be different for each person. So something that I might use immediately might take someone else a little bit more time to be able to use. So I think that that's one thing to consider, is that not everything you learn will be applicable to your current situation, but that's not why you're necessarily doing the MBA. Of course, you're doing it for, you know, where you might want to be in 5 to 10 years' time. I think another area where we see, again, that long tail come into play are those people who are looking to become entrepreneurs at some point in their life. So learning to be more resilient to dealing with stress, to dealing with how to pivot and how to manage different things. While you don't need an MBA to be successful as an entrepreneur, I definitely think it can help you fill in some knowledge gaps, but also add some confidence. So I think that those are 2 areas that really jump out at me. And then maybe the last that isn't as much on the professional side, although it is there, is also on the personal side. And it's that personal development that you experience throughout a program. And most schools and most programs will have a personal leadership development component. I know we do at RSM. And to really, that's really the true impact, for me at least, because it helps you with dealing with difficult situations and helping you to maybe avoid mistakes that you might have made had you not done the MBA. So to maybe help propel your career forward faster, but to also avoid some of the pitfalls. And that also carries over into your personal life as well, and how you interact with your partner, your spouse, or your family. A lot of the things you learn in the MBA aren't purely academic. I think that's oftentimes overlooked. And especially on that, from that perspective, that's for me also that long tail of the value of an MBA.
Our viewers at Center Court over the years know that I love the language that I get to discover with these events. So far, for the June events, we've talked about tenderness in leadership. We've talked about constellations of students. And now Brandon has brought the metaphor of planting a seed. Perhaps, Marcella, you know, you recognize a lot of the things that Brandon has shared. When you meet the IMD graduate 10 years later, the sort of perspectives that they then share with you about how the MBA program in Lausanne has had such a tremendous impact on their career.
Well, funny that you started by mentioning graduates of the 2003 class, the 2013 class, and of course we're now in 23. We actually have recently hosted an event, the 10-year reunion, the 20-year reunion, and we mingled the current class in the aperitif time. So we actually had the opportunity to have the 03, the 13 and 23 talk about would they do it again. And I have had from the 23 class exactly that question. I couldn't believe it. They literally said they would absolutely do it again, even 20 years on, 10 years on. And the impact that they have found even 20 years on has been really that focus on the personal growth that Brandon was talking about. So you start the personal growth during the MBA. We have that emphasis on self-awareness. We put them through not just each one of them has a personal coach, a group coach, but also the personal development electives. Each one has an analyst assigned to them. And it's sort of the beginning of a lifelong developmental journey, if you can put it that way. And some of the 20 years ago graduates were saying, yes, the academic, of course, was very important then, but the experience in the classroom with the confronting each other, with that diversity, not necessarily of cultural background, but also professional background and personal experiences, was what has stayed with them and has helped along also that personal development. So the challenges of literally dealing with people who are different from you, and whether they've, as Brandon said, some of them now in their 40s and 50s, the 20 years ago, they might have started that entrepreneurship career. It's not so much the academic notions that support them. It's the credential of an MBA from a top school, but also that confidence in, I know how to deal with people. I know how to look at myself first, what's going on with me first, before I can actually put other people, push other people forward.
Right, and such a personal journey. You've also given me the idea, Marcella, for the October Centre Court. Perhaps rather than having panels and fireside chats, we will have aperitifs with alumni from these groups of the years gone by. John Paul, your career, both your studies that included a PhD at MIT. I mentioned your work at the GSB before joining Des Hotels. So your knowledge of business schools. We talked before going live of sort of filling in perhaps some of those gaps of the early stage career, and then this MBA exploration that starts at Des Hotels. So how do you then project forward and think about some of the more perhaps personal characteristics that some of our other panelists have described?
Of course, Matt, and thank you for having me. I think that I would want to draw, I often explain to people that an MBA is, what does it mean to say that an MBA is a general management degree? And part of that, of course, is there's a bundle of technical skills that I often think the typical MBA student, when they're first applying, that's really at the front of their minds, because they're thinking about the specific technical skills that they think these are what employers are going to be looking for in 2 years' time. And I want to make sure that I get those. And yet an MBA is so much more than those technical skills. And indeed, over the course of your career, the weights of those shift. And what you will tend to find, I make the joke, as you mentioned, I'm a professor of organizational behavior, which is the discipline in most business schools that the students don't know what it is before they enter, but we just decided to pick a really stupid name 80 years ago. We're the management people, and we teach the management of organizations, of personnel, et cetera. And it's a great concrete example of what we're describing in terms of the payoff of the different parts of the MBA over time. Because my experience has been first-year MBA students will sometimes ask in a class such as OB, like, why do you teach this? Why do I have to learn this? And then when I'm teaching executives, or I see people at a class reunion or something, they'll say, why do you teach anything else? Because by that point in their career, that's all they're doing. I can hire someone who has those technical skills. I can't hire someone who's going to tell me whether I should hire that person. And watching those different sort of bundles of things that we have taught in the MBA change over the course of people's careers is, I think, like there's different payoffs at different times is one of the things I would stress. So If I can sort of piggyback on Brandon's idea of planting seeds, some of those are annuals, right? And some of them are oaks. And I think the most important parts of an MBA are actually the very like large, long growing, but slow maturing pieces that we post. And some of those include the type of leadership development that is sort of personal leadership development that Marcello was mentioning. We do the same at Des Hotels in the sense of trying to focus on the fact that I want to take a student that, of course, there's a huge amount of intellectual and academic material I want to convey to them. But I want to take that student who's terrified to stand up in front of the class and even so much as talk about themselves for 2 minutes. And at the end of 2 years, they should be able to give a presentation with ease. And that's the kind of skill that develops with practice and pays dividends over the course of their career.
Right. Well, the metaphor, and certainly with the backdrop behind you of all those trees as it sort of blossoms and grows, you say that 80 years ago, you're part of the curriculum defined as organizational behavior. Brandon, perhaps the media has over-defined the return on investment of an MBA because Forbes has it all down to ROI 5 years on. The FT and others are similarly focusing on salaries, perhaps 3 years out of the program. And we understand, obviously, looking at the financial return of this, what do they miss? Or what are other factors that we should be considering when we think about measuring ROI?
Oh, wow. That's a tough one, actually. It is, because oftentimes when I get framed the question, it is more around a rankings-based question, right? About what is, because that's how the argument has been framed, if you will, by the media. Because it's easy to have that discussion, right? It's easy to look at, well, you made X before the program and now you make Y, so therefore you will make, what is it they say, a million or more extra euros or dollars throughout the course of your career based on what education you have. I think it's really also about what kind of human being and what kind of citizen of the world are you going to be. I mean, quite honestly, whenever there's, and this is a personal thing, whenever I see a really nasty scandal break with a particular company, or CEO is ousted because of unethical behavior, or whatever it is, one of the first things I do actually is I'm curious what school they went to, if they got an MBA. Now, that's not to say that this is a nature versus nurture sort of thing. So I'm not suggesting that because a certain politician or a certain CEO went to school X, that means that clearly the school should have a black mark over it. No. But I think when you're talking about that ROI, it's also, what impact are you having in the world around you? And that, to me, I think is what you're starting to see a shift with the FT making small steps forward towards that, not just focusing on the money aspect of things, but I think, let's be clear, for as long as MBA programs are, relatively luxury priced, the ROI question will always be there and will have to somewhat hinge upon, it's like, for example, we were having this discussion the other day. I think all things being equal, people would love to put solar panels on their house if they thought it did better for the environment. But when they do that equation in their head about, do I really want to spend 25,000 euros or whatever it might be where you live to install solar panels, you start doing that mental math. So then you remove what you're removing from that discussion is the benefit to the environment, for example, and it really comes back down to a matters of again, dollars and cents, euros and cents kind of thing. So I think about looking at how will it change you to have a greater impact in the world around you? How will it open up your perspective to see things from a different way? Yes. How will it help you to get where you want to go? That could mean financially speaking, but for a lot of the students that we have, it's also about changing countries, right? Doing that classic triple jump of going from country to a different country, company, and then also function. But unfortunately, I think the ROI discussion is, even the moment we say return on investment, for most people, we automatically go to facts, to figures more so than everything else. So I think we need to determine a new phrase, if you will, to capture the added value, or the value that people are adding. We talk a lot about value adding and value capture within an MBA program, but maybe it's time to use those terms and own them in a different way to help shift perspective.
Great idea. We'll put it to our readers perhaps to come up with that terminology. Marcello, of course, IMD as the simple financial measure ranks extraordinarily well in Forbes and in Bloomberg and elsewhere. But much as John Paul was talking about the individual perhaps finding the confidence to stand in front of a group, you talked about confidence, which is a difficult metric to measure. So what do you like to include in the measure of ROI?
So I'm just reminded of what Omar Ardeen recently said, very simply. He said, I would hope that you've come out of the program knowing a little bit more about yourself and not recognizing yourself when you come out as being the same person as you come in. I don't know how measurable that can be, because John Paul, the metaphor that we've been using of planting seeds, and Brandon saying that each one has a different growth, and John Paul, we're talking about that. I think it goes back to that individual. Where are you at when you decide to do an MBA? What is important for you? What are the things that you value more? Brandon was saying, what impact have you made already that you want to perhaps build on? And you need credentials, and can you use the researching time before you choose the school to really understand not just what the school offers, but what it is that you're looking for. If you are looking to change, why? Again, Omar says that it's like the trump card. You only have one. So you need to play it well, and you need to play it at the right time, and you need to play it in the right place. So for me, again, we go back to, it's difficult to measure, but it is highly personal, because for me, it could be that I just want to change country and I'm happy enough because I couldn't do it before according to where I was at. Or we've had one student change 6 dimensions. I don't think we've ever had that before. We had role, industry, company, marital status, parental status, and religion. So how do you capture all of that? So I think, again, it's very much a personal, it has to be your personal value system or your personal metrics, and only researching it by talking to us, in the school, alumni, people perhaps in your industry that have done it, or in the industry that you want to go to understand what value you're going to get out of it. And again, the old alumni, the ones that have done it 10 years ago, 20 years ago, what has been their understanding or their appreciation in their trajectory.
I mean, the Olympics certainly has a triple jump. I don't know if we move into pentathlons and decathlons to capture that many shifts. But I mean, John Paul, to the discussion of individuals that look back to the organizational behavior and say, this is what I'm now using in my, you're the academic director. You have Henry Mintzberg and Reflections. You have Carl Moore sitting down with the CEO of Bombardier and their leadership journey. So how do you then look to find the right mix academically in the program that will ensure they know enough about discounted cash flow, but leave them with this wonderful legacy of skills that will be so valuable in the years that follow?
It's so funny that you mentioned discounted cash flow just that moment, because I was thinking, as you were asking my fellow panelists, what we sometimes miss in this discussion of ROI, and I'll loop it back in. If I can be blunt and concrete about that, I think one of the things that we miss is whenever I hear someone in the media talk about what's the return on investment, I want to ask, well, what's your discounting rate, right? Because if you measure people's performance 3 years out, all of the things that we were just discussing in terms of what are the seeds we're planting, how long do they take to mature, you're only looking at the fastest growing ones. And the more that your school focuses on some of the things that we've discussed here, changing industry, changing country, et cetera, the worse that ROI is going to look when you focus on 3 years out. And I think this is a challenge for many of us, because the role of the MBA has not been constant over the last 20 years or so. I think if you focus, and a lot of the ranking systems are designed with an idea of thinking sort of pre-financial crisis, where I'm basically, the modal student was usually leaving a job in industry to get an MBA to return to that same industry, usually in a higher paid position. And I think it's absolutely reasonable, at least, to think about, well, salary delta there 3 years out should be the thing to look at. When I think the modal student in most MBA programs, and particularly international MBA programs these days, is a student who is looking to change countries or change industries, then they would never have been able to make that change without the MBA, but it takes longer to pay off. And so we've all seen the effect of that when we're calculating things like ROI. The other thing it misses is we have seen at Days Hotel in recent years occasional drops in the rankings because the average salary or employment at 3 months out has gone down. But it's gone down because more students are choosing entrepreneurship, partly because Montreal has become a tech hub in North America in recent years, and many students are entering startups, whereas they wouldn't have previously. But as far as the rankings are concerned, an entrepreneur is unemployed with zero salary. And at that point, we have to shrug and say the things that we are training are going to pay off, and this is a problem with thinking about rankings or otherwise, not with the way the programs work. To your question of how you manage to to fold that together to make sure that they're focusing on both of these, I think that most of the long-term skills that we're discussing are the things that students don't realize we're trying to teach them. They're all of the things that are ancillary to those core technical classes, which isn't to say that they aren't taught in classes themselves, but I think there's a tendency, again, among an entering student or an applicant to think of these as ancillary, that, oh, there's all, in addition to the classes where I'm going to learn discounted cash flow or random forest modeling or something like that, there's also a CEO speaker series, or there's also a set of workshops where we work on presentation skills. And the truth is, the only reason those aren't classes is because there isn't something obvious that we're going to grade you on in those particular things, but they're incredibly important as part of the developmental process of an MBA. And so every school, I think, makes a point of saying that these are not simply fringe activities. These are not optional. You should think of them as part of the heart of the MBA as well. And indeed, when you see those students 5 or 10 years out, it's often those fringe activities or those extra activities that they reflect on and remember the most strongly.
In 20 minutes, the three of you have reminded me why I love the Centre Court Festival so much. I get to have conversations like this. Brandon, we talked about a 20-year sort of time frame that Jean-Paul was describing for the MBA. And it's been at least 2 decades that RSM has thought very deeply about what the school is, its own value system. I'd love you to share with viewers the mission statement that has emerged from that, and perhaps apply it to one of our viewers, Stephen, who looks at things like environmental impact. And, shouldn't that be easier to measure, quantify, layer into this discussion? Thank you, Stephen, for a great question. As you look at perhaps the personal experiences of your MBAs, and if their personal goal was related to sustainability and environment, how you've seen them being able to pursue and have that sort of positive force.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw that question come in, so I'm glad you threw it this way, because I think it definitely aligns with where we're at. So when I joined RSM many years ago, the mission statement was the business school that lives and thinks in the future. And I'm a marketing person, so for me, that's, I don't know how much water that can hold and how you can really, what are the reasons to believe. Thankfully, though, several years ago, we changed our mission statement to be a force for positive change. And I think that I'm not going to say we were the first, but especially in Europe, we were one of the first that has sort of really planted a flag and saying, okay, this is what we're going to be about. And back in those days, I have to admit, it was difficult when you would recruit because students are smart, right? Or candidates are smart. And they say, well, great, you're saying this. Show me the money, right? Where is it in the program? And we've worked tremendously hard since that time where we decided to make this be our mission statement, to really embed this in the program and to find those measurable ways as the question was coming in through the Q&A. And really for us, it's not just about sustainability. It's based off of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And I think oftentimes when we talk about impact or even with the way the question came in, sustainability is one part of it. And that's why I like it being based on the SDGs. And while we can't say that we can affect all 17 of them, we identify certain ones where we feel that we, either through the research that we generate as the university or through the change agents that we would like to think that we act as the catalyst to help turn people's thinking and to get them thinking in different ways. A lot of the candidates that I meet, we're 99% international. Most of our students are coming, or a lot of them, I should say, 75% are non-EU citizens. So we're visiting a lot of developing economies and places around the world where people want to go to the MBA to learn how to have this impact, and then to go back and then to be able to have that impact, not only necessarily within Europe, in my case, staying in the Netherlands, but also returning home. That's a common thing that I hear, to say, look, I'd love to get some European experience, but I want to come home and help my local economy. I want to help my country and my people. And that's really powerful to me. When it comes to measurements and metrics, there's a lot of different things we have. We do have on the individual scale, we do benchmarking on the way in and on the way out. try to make it based on science as best we can. It is kind of a dark art sometimes when you're looking at the individual. We also look at the impact we have within the community and within the region. So we've done partnered with several institutions to do business assessments to see, okay, what is the true impact of an RSM alum, both economically, but also from the perspective of the kinds of things that they're doing that would be more towards the ESG side of things. And then I would say finally, what we're now starting to see, and this was, to be quite honest, this was a discussion point as it relates to the rankings, and what John Paul was saying is that sometimes the choices you take as a school do have consequences when it comes to that measurement of ROI. I mean, RSM, you can imagine when we were really going down that road and saying, look, if you want to be a consultant, that's fine, but if you want to be someone in the sustainability space, that's fine too. Well, I can tell you, even 5 years ago, the number of those roles that existed weren't as great as they are now, right? As far as roles that are related to sustainability and those sort of things. But they also weren't paid quite as well. So you did find yourself in the situation where you're delivering on your mission statement of truly attracting and delivering candidates and students who believe in this mission and want to make it part of their business identity and their personal identity moving forward. But there is a little bit of a trade-off. Right. And I think that, schools are putting pressure on rankings bodies such as the FT. They did make some concessions this year. I'm sure there will be more moving forward. But while on the one hand, it is sometimes easier to quantify because there are more measurable things, by the same token for us, it's not just about sustainability. It's really about all of the SDGs, sustainable cities, access to education, gender equality, things like that. So we measure them both within the programs, but also within the school as well through our DEI initiatives and things like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you for the the flag that you've planted. We just need to be careful where we plant the flag because we've also been planting seeds.
It's a big
and you've
garden,
taken us to 17 of the SDGs. Marcella, you've been at IMD for close to 17 years. You've seen triple jumps. You've seen individuals that have affected tremendous change. And part of your mission statement behind you talks about real impact. So as you think of all of the students that you've seen come through during your time at the school, how you've witnessed achieving their personal goals, was it often something that they discovered during the MBA program? Or again, it was laying the groundwork for them to be able to make that move at a later stage?
Interesting question, because again, with a small school like ours, it's really very much seeing one person per person, if you like, on an individual. So it's both in a way, and I think like Brandon was saying, the fact that we, on the one hand, we do put the emphasis on sustainability and the impact that everyone, especially the new generations coming in, wanting to do. There is that trade-off, maybe I need a corporate position that pays a little bit better for a couple of years, pay off my loan and then go back and do what I truly want. And I think that's what we're seeing a little bit more of, perhaps putting their project on the back burner for a while, or developing it perhaps at a slower pace to then be able to go into it fully later on, perhaps 10 years down the line, 15 years down the line. But it really also depends. We've also seen people that straight after the MBA have gone into their project. We have this venture capital award with 100,000 francs donated by one of our alums, super entrepreneur in San Francisco. And last year, the person who won it finished the MBA and now is working on that project based here in Lausanne to develop it to the next stage. So it's difficult to do, to say for a general rule. Again, it depends on the individual, but I think it's that trade-off that each one has to make. Do I need to do something in practical, or can I go do something idealistic, or can I wait and then do both?
Right. And perhaps, Marcello, I mean, it's a very deliberate decision to take that break, whether it's 1 year or a 2-year program, and return to school. Do you think that already implies a level of determination or looking for change?
Well, I think that's the first ingredient. Often when I speak to those that are interested, prospects, they're interested, what you first see is that fire. Something has got to budge, something has got to move. They don't quite know yet. They're itchy, they've got itchy feet, itchy something, they're antsy, and they're looking for an MBA. They start with looking for an MBA. Might not necessarily be that is what they're looking for, but that's certainly that first fire that gets them to move. Often they see the stuckness that could that as a consequence of a very technical role. And so, as I was saying before, with Omar said the trump card, they decide it's now time to use that trump card, because if I don't, I'll get stuck in a vocational trap and won't be able later on down the line to get out of it. So now's the time to, like you said, deliberately take a year out. It is only a year in a sense. Yes, it could be, it is a big gap, but also a small gap in terms also of loss of income. But at the same time, it's a deliberate choice to say, hang on a minute, let me just go back, pause, reevaluate my life, my situation, professional, personal, whatever it might be. Take that time to see 5 years time, what might they look like? 10 years time, what might they look like? We all talked about the MBA as an opportunity to change and develop. And I think one of the things that we always say, and I'm sure everybody would agree, is the main ingredient for an MBA candidate is to be open to that process. You come in with certain ideas. The challenge is to change those ideas, to allow those ideas to mold, be influenced, and change. But I think the first step is to gauge, why are you taking this year out? What is going on in your life that you need to get out for a year, stop and think? And I think that's the interesting thing, because then everybody will be at a different stage, and with the diversity of population from all over the world, you get to hear very different stories, some similar, some threads. This antsiness is a thread that they have in common, but at the same time, each one has a personal story as to why they want to take that year out and what they're doing with it, what they're imagining could come afterwards. And then they come through the program and they change.
Right.
They change all their ideas.
Viewing Centre Court, thinking about taking that first step and committing to business school. Jean-Paul, moving from discounted cash flow, you could probably run rings around me with all of this terminology, but to opportunity cost. Now, here we are in a market, the Canadian job market has been vibrant in recent years, and people are saying, I've got this job security and these different opportunities. How do you like to help them think about the opportunity cost of the MBA, and rather than sitting on the sideline, taking that first step?
I think that it's a great question, especially given how many of our students are simultaneously deciding to come to Des Hôtels, to come to McGill, but also to come to Canada. And about 70% of the student body at Des Hôtels comes from outside of North America. I think that for me, it is always very important to keep a perspective on, I'm going to sound like a labor economist, and I apologize to everyone in advance, but sort of why do people get MBAs, and at a very high level, and how that changes over time is, I think, important for understanding this. And this does relate to the things that my fellow panelists have been discussing. I think in particular, it's worth noticing there's a surprisingly large number of students applying for MBAs, and this has been true for probably 15 or 20 years, who want to change the world, and for some reason have decided that an MBA is the best way to do that. And I want to stress that that has not been the case forever. I think those same students maybe 30 years ago would have thought the obvious thing to do is to go to law school. Mm-hmm. Maybe 20 years before that, they would have become journalists. Like, there's a type of student who they want to have that kind of impact, but they're looking for some organizational support to do it. And I think that one of the things that has helped the MBA, there are many reasons why the MBA has been the focus of this for decades now. But I think it's that sense that I want to change the world, but I also want to learn how to, the change part is important. Like, if I want to learn about climate change, if I want to learn about sustainable development, there are programs, there are masters in natural resources, there are masters in environmental science, and so on. But I think the feeling of some of those students is, I'm not going to learn how to be effective in organizations at the same time. And that has been a huge portion of what feeds many people with those interests into MBA programs. And I think that's important for then looking at the larger labor market, because what we often want to point out to people is the balance that Marcello was describing a student having to take of, do I put this project on the back burner for a while? I think there can be a naive tendency to see that as, I have these aspirations, I go into the MBA and I immediately scale back my aspirations. And I don't think that's quite right. This comes back to the different seeds that we're planting, that I learn some sequencing. If I want to be more effective in literally effecting that type of change, then perhaps I need to develop that for a while so then I can come back. And so I think that understanding that there's, that idea that there are things that pay off at different times in an MBA education, and that employers are looking for at different stages, like some of the skills that we try to impart to students in an MBA are not the skills that are going to immediately get them hired. They are the skills that once they have a job, once they have they can hopefully rise to positions where they can then have the influence that they want. And so I often explain to students, you cannot look at every single piece of the education of an MBA as, this is something we're doing to get you that internship, to get you that next job. But these are the things that are going to pay off later on. And so especially when I look at the Canadian labor market, it's absolutely true that there is an increase, for example, in interest in students who can, for example, they have a concentration in finance, but they understand how to think about something like impact investing. They have a concentration in something like accounting, but they're thinking through triple bottom line accounting. And I mean, I loved the way that Brandon was describing what RSM has done in terms of making a commitment to sustainability over time and thinking about how that pays off. And I think any of us who genuinely care about these issues and are involved with MBA programs, this has been a period of what keeps us up at night is the worry that we don't want to be greenwashing. We don't want to have, and for an international audience, right, greenwashing is ceremonial compliance with things like an environmental commitment, that there's no substance behind the advertising. And so that has been a challenge we've had at Des Hotels, is saying we don't want to just add another course on sustainable management. We actually want to change the core classes so that we're covering how this shows up in lots of different disciplines at the same time. But I want to stress that's not just coming from personal commitments by myself and other professors. It's also us paying attention to what employers want, right? That they want to say, someone who just has a class in sustainable management, who I'm hiring to handle financial control, I need them to know how to apply it in that particular case. And so in that, I think many of us have been trying to get out ahead of, as many firms in Canada and elsewhere have started waking up to their issues like this, they need to pay more attention to. The goal of the MBA has also, we try to survey the market and pay attention to how we can contribute to those things as well.
Breaking down those silos, Jean-Paul shares with us, Brandon, the idea of individuals that want to change the world. There are other external factors, and in the last 7 months, the quasi-hysteria that has surrounded ChatGPT and how that's going to change our worlds. To take AI as an example, how do you then broach an area like this, not necessarily to churn out a bunch of prompt engineers, but to equip your students with perhaps a mindset, a way of looking at these challenges, opportunities, and to be able to then integrate, adapt with these ever-changing technological advances that are sure to be part of the future of their career?
It's funny. I sometimes when I living in Europe, one thing I like is I can walk to so many different places, right? Because it's nearby. And so I have a daughter who's 11, and so I think about what kind of jobs is she going to have, right? When she enters the job market, 10 years from now, whatever that's going to be. So it's something I think about on a personal level as well. And I think that there is a little bit of apprehension, I think, in the academic community or higher education in general about how students will use AI. There have been discussions about it on campus and very, very strong arguments for it and against it and everything else. But what's interesting, I think it's about how to use that technology. And prime example, if you see a lot of the generative AI that's coming out now, especially in the creative space around music, music is a great example where in China, there are thousands of songs that are charting now on different charts that were completely generated by AI with AI vocals as well. So the vocals that are being sung are also generated from AI. But it's also in how you prompt things. So as with any tool that has come out throughout, eternity, I'm sure that people back when the wheel was invented or fire was invented looked at it thinking, my goodness, this could kill us, right? This could burn, in the case of fire. But someone had the idea of, well, wait a second, we can take this really, I'm not digging sushi, but what if I had a really nice, grilled piece of salmon? Aha, fire can help me to bridge that gap. And I think some of us we'll get there faster than others, but it's also about the output. So if I'll come back to the generative AI, especially in the creative space, 10 people can type in 10 complete different prompts on to create, an image of a child riding a bicycle on the moon. And that's going to look completely different in every single one. So there's also going to be skill in adapting of how you use this AI and identifying in which areas it can be supportive. Yes, it is absolutely true. I do agree that there will be probably a relatively large culling of jobs in the next few years, but that also provides opportunity. But that's almost been the way it's always been throughout the technological evolution of things, right? So when cars came along, it's not like we didn't have a need for horses anymore. And so it's about being comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I think that goes back to, it's a little cliche, but that's something that an MBA should be teaching you, is about how to identify opportunity, how to exploit those opportunities that present themselves. So I think everyone's at a different stage of comfort when it comes to AI specifically. I think it's okay to not understand everything, but to really be able to look for the opportunities of how it can help not only do your job better, but to maybe help push you in different directions in ways that you didn't go. So I think it's interesting to see, but again, at least in my opinion, when you look at these different technological cycles that come along, there's always the people that say the sky is falling. There are always the people who are like, hold on, I need to see about this. And then they're the ones who just grab it and go with it, and, Grimes in the music space is a prime example of someone saying, hey, listen, if you want to use AI to create my voice and you want to make a song with my voice, totally fine. But I want 50% of those royalties. That's someone who's looking at it as an opportunity, and I'm sure other artists will look at it as well. But those are just some thoughts I would say around it. Yeah.
And as Brandon brings in the music industry, Marcella, those that might say to you when you're meeting candidates talking about the IMD program, say, yeah, but this is for consultants, this is for bankers, this is for people working in the tech sector, engineers, but it's not for me. I work in the music industry. How do you like them to think about such broad potential application, whether we're cooking salmon on the fire or completely reinventing Asian music?
Well, I think the first thing is we go back to each person is, each case is different. What is it that you're looking for? Why are you even talking to me? Obviously something is stirring and brewing. And then get to that part where we explain that again, and riding a little bit on what Brandon was saying, it's about the mindset. It's not what you do about AI. It's about creating during the program, during an MBA program, you get to have those conversations. You get to see, you get to experiment with opportunities and challenges, and who thinks opportunities and who thinks challenges. And with that, once again, we've had pilots, we've had fashion designers, we've had people in the music industry. 2003, in fact, we have somebody with a record label who's still working in that record label in London. So we've had doctors, we have lawyers, and those, I think what is interesting about those profiles that come in is they want to be exposed to business. I think there's obviously, there seems to be a thinking that perhaps change impact comes through business. And that's why, riding on what John Paul was saying, perhaps it's going to an MBA because it gives you access to a business way of thinking, as now we're thinking that impact makes more sense when it's done via a business. And so I think, once again, if you're a doctor, what is it that you're looking for with an MBA? And I think, yes, there's business skills, but once again, that context, that fertile territory, if we go back to planting seeds, where seeds can be planted, and then we see what happens with the doctors, with the lawyers, with the engineers, with the techs, with the finances. And I think, although some schools do have that association, I go to that school because I want to enter that industry. It's a little bit short-sighted in the sense that you want to go to that school because you want to go and experience the program that school has put together, and then discover whether being a consultant is what it is that you need to do as your next step, is what makes sense for you. And so I wouldn't necessarily look at the school for its output, but I would look at the school for the process, for the washing machine, the cycle that they put you through, if that's what you're looking for. And then through that, you might even change. You might come in thinking, I want that school because I want that particular access to that particular industry. But while you're doing that, something completely different comes through as an opportunity.
So my final question to all three of you is addressed to a younger you, perhaps a student or an early career, about to embark on a prestigious academic career, about to start running restaurants or creating parental support groups. Who knew where the next steps would take you? John Paul, when you meet potential MBA applicants, how do you like them to think about next choice, providing some sort of framework, pursuing the MBA, what you would like them to think about as they take the next steps?
I think that it's a very good question, and I'm going to do you the disservice of answering it as honestly as possible. And what I mean by that
I'm flattered.
there's a portion of those students where I tell them not to get an MBA, right? And I think that one of the elephants in the room that we should always acknowledge is that MBA enrollments worldwide peaked around 2008, and they have been flat or declining in many places over the last 15 years or so. That's not necessarily a bad thing. One of the reasons why we see that decline has been that I think in the late 90s and early 2000s, the MBA got used. It was the hammer that everyone then saw problem. Everything looks like a nail. And gradually, many business schools do not just offer MBAs anymore. Many of us have specialized master's degrees covering certain portions of what is taught in an MBA. I think those are valuable things, but then the question always becomes, why would you get an MBA as opposed to a more specialized master's degree? And that's a very real conversation we often have to have with students. And to bring it full circle, I always point out to them, if you're getting the MBA specifically for that bundle of technical skills, you're probably making the wrong decision. And I say that because there probably is a specialized master's degree that will get you some of those same technical skills. And if that's the way that you're valuing this thing, then you're going to think the MBA is not good value for the money. On the other hand, if you have an interest in more enduring impact in organizations, if you're thinking about leadership potential over the course of your entire career, and if you're willing to make some investments that pay off, that have larger payoffs over a longer time horizon, then the MBA is the right program for you. And part of me is very glad in a way that we have had that proliferation of graduate programs over the last several of years, because I don't want the person who only wants a very narrow set of technical skills sort of in the MBA classroom, in the MBA program, saying that we should jettison all of these other things, because I think that person doesn't understand the value proposition correctly. And so I think the conversation that I often have with people relates to that, in the sort of, what are your longer term career aspirations? And this is whenever we interview students, this is one of the things that we're paying attention to. How does this degree fit into your larger career plan? And if it is, they're thinking about, if they only care about the payoffs over the next, ironically, the years that the rankings care about, 3 to 5 years, then, in many cases, we might be trying to steer that person away from doing an MBA, to explain that we're not doing you a favor putting you in this particular program, if that's the way you want to think about it. On the other hand, the student who cares about those things I really want to double down and bring those people in, because those are the ones that we want to work with.
Yeah. Parenting, Brandon, is perhaps one of the, if not the most important roles you will have. Your daughter probably wouldn't worry if you went to business school or not. So your thoughts about, any candidate and just making the right choice for themselves.
Well, ironically, she was 1 when I was doing my MBA, so she wasn't aware of it. But when she would go to sleep, Dad would stay up doing his homework till late in the night. It's interesting having been on both sides of the table now, and I remember the way, and this is my point. I remember how I found out about the MBA program I wanted to do. I was at a networking event, and the person next to me said, "Hey, what are you doing this weekend?" "Oh, I'm going to my graduation." Graduation? This guy's in his 30s. What are you? "Oh yeah, my MBA graduation." And that for me was like the touchstone moment of like, oh, I never thought about doing an MBA. I probably, in full disclosure, did not do as much research as I should have when I originally was thinking about doing an MBA. I'm tremendously happy that I did, and it has afforded me a lot of opportunities, but it took me a while to really sort out, looking back, why I wanted to do it. And I think retroactively, I found that, but I think at the moment I sort of did to what Jean-Paul was saying, which is, it's kind of like the marketing and the hype around MBAs. We've done a tremendous job in this industry around that. It's kind of like there's almost a master's in some regions, not everywhere, but a specialized master's would be a better fit for you. We have these conversations as well because we're very transparent, we're very honest, and I think you'll find most schools are, because we want you to take the right decision. We want you to find what's best for you. We're not selling cars here, right? And this is a life decision. And so sometimes you have a discussion with someone and you say, "Hey, listen, why are you wanting to do an MBA? You're telling me you really want to be in finance, you really want to be in private equity, or you really want to be in whatever it is. Why do you want to do an MBA?" "Yeah, but people know MBA and I'll make more money." And that may or may not be true, because for every person who absolutely does get X multiplier off of their salary coming into the program, there are also plenty of people who don't, right? So, I mean, it's also, I think going back to my younger self and saying, "Hey, listen, why do you really want to do this? What do you really want to get out of it?" And from that perspective, I think is something that is really critical, and not just doing it because you think it's going to be the magic dust that changes your situation. I speak with people sometimes who, they start off talking about how unhappy they are at work. And, if this is your escape pod, there are probably other escape pods that you haven't explored yet that might be a better fit for you at that moment. You want to make sure you take this decision from a real point of clarity, because the money, you can make the money back, but going back to that opportunity cost, it's probably the last time in your life, depending on if it's 1 year or 2 years. And this, I think, is the true magic of the MBA. And I'll finish with this. It's the last time in your life, most likely, that you will be able to take a year or two and focus solely on yourself without being called a selfish, what. And so you really want to make sure that you're choosing the right time and the right opportunity to do that. And, there is an opportunity cost, but if you do it right, it makes a lot of sense, but you have to really make sure that's what you want. And I think that's something that I would have gone back. I still probably would have chosen the same program that I did, but I probably would have thought about it a little bit more, because, to be quite candid, at that moment, I wasn't happy in my job, right? And so maybe there were other escape pods. It worked out in the end for me.
Is describing, Marcella, is that why IMD places so much emphasis, puts so much time, resource, your team, and this commitment to assessment, even just going through the application process is holding up a mirror, which I see as a gift. We talk about the enduring value of the MBA, but even the application process, if it is encouraging this level of introspection that all of you have spoken to, that's a wonderful place to start.
And exactly that. It's the starting point to get you to step back and reflect. Is this the right time? Brandon was saying, am I looking for the escape pod? John Paul was saying, maybe I should do a master's in this if I really want to do that. But also, is now the right time? I've had chats with students who haven't even finished university, and they're like, there's this how do you say, this rush of, I haven't finished, what's my next thing? And perhaps it's also a generational thing, perhaps it's a gray hair thing, but it's been really a sort of, okay, breathe a minute. You haven't even finished school, you don't even know what you want. Yes, you might have 2 startups on the side and something else going on. So there is that high energy that we see that I didn't see, almost 20 years ago. But at the same time, so this impatience, right? That's what I was talking about. But at the same time, wait a minute, perhaps it is better to start that first job first, to get 2-3 years work experience. So the right timing, what I'm trying to get at is the right timing is just as important as, is this the right program for you? Are my values in line with what the program is going to develop? Am I ready for that leadership development? We talked about, all of us talked about developing personally. Am I mature enough that I can handle it, is also something that for me is really important. And also, let's not forget that all this inscribes into the wider community of the school, of the alumni network. Am I at the right time that I can take advantage of all of that is laid out before me? And I think that's something also that is in the application process. The slower it is, we hope, the slower we have time to address it, the more time we have to address and understand if this is the right time for each candidate.
Well, I think that the three of you have given a launch pad to all of our viewers, not just live today, but in subsequent weeks and months of watching this. And it wasn't a disservice. It was absolutely to your credit, the level of honesty and candor, the thoughtfulness and insight that you brought with, as I say, this is why I love Centre Court so much. So I know that we've got another session starting very soon, but a very personal thanks to Brandon, to Marcella, to John Paul. Thanks for joining us for such a great session at Centre Court.
Thank you so much for having us.
Pleasure.